We're talking today with Ed, now
Wietecha.
Wietecha. All right, Ed Wietecha of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project, and I can spell the man's name better than I can say it. All right, Ed, could you start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Pottsville, Pennsylvania in 1945, right at the tail end of World War II. And it was in Pennsylvania because my mom had gone back to her folks while my dad was serving overseas.
Okay.
Or wasn't really serving overseas, he was in the North Atlantic. And back and forth and so forth, so it made more sense at that time for mom to be at home. She couldn't stay with him. So my sister and I were in Pottsville, and then it was strange, all my uncles, almost all my uncles had served in World War II. Some were severely wounded, others were, had spent time overseas. But it was kind of a generational thing that as you got older and if there was a war on, you served your country. That was just what you did, okay?
And your father was in the Navy?
Yes, Dad served in the Navy, career Navy. He was one of the old China hands. He actually served on the Chinese rivers prior to World War I or World War II when the Japanese had invaded China. And one of the ships on his river fleet, the Pan A, had been sunk by the Japanese, as a matter of fact, as part of the same flotilla. Mm-hmm. In any event, Dad was reassigned from the North Atlantic to Great Lakes Naval Training Center, so the family moved to Waukegan, Illinois, and that's where I was raised and ultimately went to the University of Illinois.
Okay. When did you finish high school?
Finished high school in 1967.
Okay.
Okay.
And so by that time, the Vietnam War is going on.
It was just beginning to get a little bit hot, and there was an assumption there'd be a war. And I started thinking about, what will I do and so forth. And originally was going to go into the Marine Corps under what's called the platoon leader class, a commissioning program. Mm-hmm. And then some buddies of mine were at the University of Illinois, where I was going to be going, and they had mentioned Naval ROTC. I said, yeah, but I want to go in the Marine Corps.
Okay, I guess I just want to back up a little bit. I had asked you when you graduated from high school,
right?
And you said 67.
That
would
made
be
a mistake.
College. So
right.
High school is 63?
63, my
right.
mistake.
Okay, yeah. So at that point, that makes more sense, because then there's something going on in Vietnam, but there's not an actual war going on yet.
No.
There is a draft. So anyway, so you were saying you were interested in a platoon leader class.
Mm-hmm. And then decided not to go to platoon leader class, but instead to go to the Naval ROTC. At the end of college, I'd still be commissioned. I'd still go into the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. Which is what happened.
Okay, so why were there two tracks to go into the Marine Corps?
A number of different ways to get into the Marine Corps. You had the platoon leaders class, then you had an officer candidate program, which was separate for the PLC, then you had Naval ROTC, and of course you had the Naval Academy.
Right.
And these were all different kinds of commissioning programs that would appeal to different people, different stages in their lives. So, what was more convenient for somebody, how they want to go, what they want to do during their summers when they were in college.
Okay. And would a platoon leader, would the assumption be that you'd simply go just be a regular infantryman in the Marines if you were just doing that and that would be all you'd learn? Or could you be platoon leader in anything?
You could platoon leader anything.
Okay.
It's important to realize that in the Marine Corps, when you were commissioned, you went to the basic school. Mm-hmm. And all Marine officers went to the basic school. And what that turned out were qualified infantry platoon commanders. Right. That's what it was.
Right.
And then if you wanted to become aviator, then you went on to various types of aviation school, either fixed or rotary wing, or in my case, artillery. So I was sent for artillery training, and people who wanted to go into tanks then went on to tank training.
Okay. Let's back up to the time when you're in college at the University of Illinois, mm-hmm. because while you were there, Vietnam does start to heat up. Mm-hmm. Marines land in March of '65, right. The Army follows. And by the time you graduate in '67, there's a major shooting war going on. Mm-hmm. All right. And how much attention did you pay to that while you were still in college?
Well, a lot, because again, I was in a commissioning program already. Mm-hmm. We had that required meeting with my peers in military classes and things like that. And of course, Vietnam was a topic of discussion every week. And what was going on, we had classmates who were in Vietnam. A fellow who was a year ahead of us was killed. My senior year, he graduated when I was a junior, and the following year he was killed up in I Corps. And of course, those are the discussions we talked about.
Did you also have a summer training program? Would you go someplace and do something?
Most certainly. The PLC people would go twice, 2 summers for summer training. Mm-hmm. And the idea there was basically to weed people out. That was the purpose. Naval ROTC, we would go between our junior senior year, and there's a kind of a dual purpose in that program. The assumption was we would be weeded out through the Naval ROTC program. So this was to try and weed us out from a physical standpoint if we couldn't hack it physically, and actually begin to teach us something. Okay, so slightly different. So I went between my junior senior year. I did very well in my class, and because of that I was offered a regular commission rather than reserve commission, which I subsequently received. And that was 6 weeks long.
All right. Now, was there going to be a difference in terms of the length of time you'd have to serve if you were doing regular versus reserve, or was it the same commitment?
A reserve officer would be commissioned and would agree to serve a minimum of 3 years. A regular would serve a minimum of 4 years.
Okay.
So other than that, and of course the regular could only be released from active duty if there was a contraction of the armed forces. Through standardized procedures. It wasn't like we're going to lay you off, which could occur to the reserves. We were the ones who were there. We were the core, so to speak, who would stay on even if the military shrunk.
Okay. So you finished college then in 67. What's the next step for you then?
Well, finished college, immediately went to Quantico and started the basic school. And then in late August, my fiance joined me. We got married on a Monday night after a day of field exercises, and the next day I was back in the field again. And so it was a wartime romance, so to speak. 48 years now.
Okay. Now, how did she feel about this at the time? You're going into the Marines, you're going to go to Vietnam. Was she concerned about that, or did she just accept that?
Well, I learned after the fact that among the girlfriends and wives of girlfriends, because we weren't allowed to get married until we were commissioned, but among the girlfriends of all the Marine candidates, I was among the most likely nominated to be most likely killed. I'm serious, because I was probably going to be going infantry, and I was pretty gung-ho, and I don't know how they came up with that, but she told me that after the fact. But she accepted it. Her dad served in the Army in the Second World War, and it's just the way it was.
Okay. All right. Now, what did the training at Quantico actually consist of? Oh,
a lot of physical training. The idea wasn't to weed us out, because we'd already been thin, the herd had been culled very well from a physical standpoint. So they wanted to train us to be leaders. And one thing they had to do, we had to know weapons and tactics, so we learned every weapon in the Marine Corps that would be used up to a battalion level. Pistols, rifle, flamethrowers, bazookas, laws. Okay, we learned how to use that stuff, machine guns. We learned how to command men, fire teams, squads, platoons. We learned fire team, platoon tactics, or squad tactics, platoon tactics, and enough of company tactics so we had an idea where we fit within a larger scope of things. But we were basically being trained as platoon commanders, so if you're a platoon commander, an infantry platoon commander, you learned it. And it was amazing how effective that training was.
Were you being?
Tremendously effective. I remember I got hit, or my patrol got hit once a year later, and reacted just the way I'd done a year trained to do a year later. It just blew my mind how, what the hell did I just do? Exactly the way I've been trained. And excellent training.
Okay. Were the people training you people who had been to Vietnam already?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, all of our trainers were Vietnam vets.
And were they telling you very much about what they experienced or what to expect, or were they just saying, do this way?
Both. The idea was not to train us based upon, here's what I learned in Vietnam. The idea was to train us in doctrine so we could serve in Vietnam, as well as serve in other types of conflicts if they came along. I remember one discussion was, we're not training to be rice paddy lieutenants. We're training to be lieutenants. And of course the emphasis was on jungle warfare and so forth. But we learned combat in a built-up area, for example. And it's different combat in a built-up area than it is in a rice paddy or a jungle. And there weren't that many built up areas in Vietnam, but it probably came in handy for the guys who fought in Hue or Saigon. In my case, I never got into a city.
Right. Okay. So how long did you spend at Quantico?
Quantico was 5 months. I remember graduating and eating a bologna sandwich in the car with my wife as we're headed toward Fort Sill.
All right.
And Fort Sill, and then I was at Fort Sill learning everything about an artillery battery, of which there are 3 primary components.
Okay. Before we go there, so where is Fort Sill?
Fort Sill's in southern Oklahoma. It's about 90 miles southwest of Oklahoma City.
Okay. And that's kind of a main Army artillery training center?
Yes.
Okay.
All Marine artillery officers are sent to Fort Sill. So where we receive our training, our enlisted personnel receive their artillery training on either the west or east coast, depending on what division they're assigned to.
Right. Okay. And what did the artillery training consist of?
Well, as I said, artillery basically at our level would consist of the battery. You got the artillery battery, which consisted of the guns themselves, and a fire direction center where information was calculated, sent to the guns, and the guns would then fire their artillery out in support of the infantry. And there would be a forward observer with the infantry who would see where the round would land, make adjustments, send the information back to the fire direction center, who would make adjustments and put it in language the guns could understand. The guns would make their adjustments there, fire the next round out, and so forth until the target was destroyed.
Right.
So you had the forward observer, had to learn how to adjust artillery, and live in the field as a forward observer and living with the infantry. You had to learn how to use and work at the fire direction center and understand that and command it and lead it and double check it and so forth. And then you had to know the guns themselves, because how do you operate them, how do you adjust them, how do you lay the battery and so forth.
Okay.
3 distinct aspects.
And then what kinds of artillery pieces did you train on?
We trained on 105 millimeter howitzers and 155 millimeter howitzers. Marine Corps uses the 105 and the 155. The Army uses the 105, the 155, but the Army also had self-propelled 105s and 155s, when the Marine Corps did not.
Yeah. And the Army had bigger ones than that. They had 8-inchers and 175s. And
The Marine Corps actually had 175s. The Army didn't really have those at that stage of the game. They're pretty well phased out. Marine Corps still had a few, and of course the Army and the Marine Corps both had 8-inch howitzers, which is an extremely accurate, very powerful weapon.
All right. And now, did your wife? So your wife came out with you to Fort Sill. So did you live off the base, or did you have to stay on the base?
I lived off base. Yeah.
Okay.
Found a small, kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, living room kind of apartment. That was it. We were lucky to find it. During the war, very hard to find off-base housing that was decent at all.
Because there's not much of a town there, really. It was like Lawton, Oklahoma, or something like that, or.
No. Lawton itself was developing, and it's turned, after the war, it grew additional, and some industry moved in and so forth. I have no idea what it's like now, though. But, the military post was it. It was a huge military post. And you had an interstate coming down from Oklahoma City all the way down to Wichita Falls in Texas that kind of bisected the post, and we'd fire from one firing range on this side of the highway to that side of the highway, 10 clicks this way to 30 clicks that way as we'd fire our artillery.
All right. And what kind of relation did the people who lived in the town, how did they view or treat the Army personnel or the military personnel?
I'd rather talk about that when we get back to, because we lived in our own little world. There are a couple of Marine officers in the same, there's 2 Marines and an Army officer living in this little fort complex that we lived in, and somebody from town. Okay. And basically, we stayed unto ourselves, and we're studying all day and in the range or whatever. Right. But we got to know Lawton when I came back, because after I came back from Vietnam, I was reassigned to Fort Sill as an instructor, so I got to know the town. Okay. So we'll leave that for that part of the story then. Okay. Okay. So how long did you spend training at Fort Sill? I think that was about 4 to 5 months. Okay. So when did you finish all of that? I finished all that, and I flew out of Chicago the day after Martin Luther King was murdered.
Okay, so this is now getting to March of 68? Or, yeah. Okay.
I mean, I was getting my uniform ready. We're going to O'Hare the next day, and we saw the news. We're watching all the horror that was occurring associated with this assassination.
Because you got those rioting in Chicago eventually and other places. And now, even before that, the Tet Offensive had started back in Vietnam. So things had gotten very hot. And were you thinking, gee, just my luck, I'm going at the wrong time? Or
Nope.
Okay.
I just figured something would be going on when I got there, and I wasn't concerned that I missed something, and I wasn't concerned, oh, geez, you know, I wish I were there. And it was just something, you know, it was no big deal. My turn would come.
Right. Okay. So you are, now let's see, you go out to, you fly out of California, all right? And do you stop any place along the way?
We stopped in Japan briefly to refuel. Then in the case of Marines, we landed at Okinawa. I stayed there with another lieutenant a couple extra days because I needed some officers to sign off on serial numbers as we inventoried an armory. So you and you, come in. That was it. And then we hopped on planes and flew into Vietnam, flew into Da Nang.
Okay. And what was your first impression of Vietnam when you got there?
The smell was just something different. It was hot. So you got off the plane and you immediately turned into sweat. And your clothes are dripping. And then, of course, there were all the soldiers and whatnot, and military folks around there just dripping wet. There was an odor in the air you couldn't put your finger on. What is this? It didn't smell like Chicago, you know. And it turned out it was the rice paddies and whatnot, just the fields around us. It seemed to be mass confusion. And somehow, however, it worked. We got hooked up with somebody. We were told we were going to be going up north to join our unit. We knew we had orders as to what unit we'd be joining, and I was not going in country per se. I was going to be joining an amphibious task force, which I could tell you about later, and happened to fall in with a senior enlisted man, a Mustanger, who Mustang is an enlisted man who became an officer. In this case, he did not become a commissioned officer, became a warrant officer, and he was working in intelligence. So he was doing some minor spy work, if you will, spending a lot of time with the indigenous population trying to get information. So it wasn't James Bond flying. So he grabbed myself and another lieutenant who kind of which way's up, and he took us up to Phu Bai first. And it was strange. We got in the plane and we're sitting up there and you're kind of sweating, you know, no weapons, no nothing, what's still going on. It's all confusing and whatnot. And the pilot gets on. We're going to be landing in a few minutes. We'll take a very steep descent because they're mortaring the field. Oh, geez, this is getting, you know, what the hell? Please get off the plane as rapidly as possible, which we did. So he's flying along and whoop, your stomach's in your throat, and we landed. And we stayed with that warrant officer for a couple of days. I went into the town of Dong Ha with him. I actually had which I don't remember anything about other than I was eating some kind of mixture of rice and something or else in a restaurant in this kind of hovel kind of place. And he talked to somebody in the back room. He grabs me and says, "Come on, we got to go." He runs us back, and he in turn had to go to division and alert them there's, you know, increased probability of an attack on the whole area. And it turned out that if such an attack did occur, there were certain designated units that would become, quote, Task Force Robbie, okay? And the task force was activated. It was good intelligence, many people, and we watched the rest of that night as all hell's breaking loose to the west of us. You know, all kind of good stuff was going on as they were sitting there on the, you know, foxholes outside Dong Ha.
Okay. Now, Dong Ha was fairly far north itself, right?
Oh, yeah.
It was pretty close to DMZ.
Yeah.
Now, but at this point, you're not with the battalion you've been assigned to? You're
No,
just
we're
on
still
the
trying to
base.
get to them.
Okay. So where were they actually on ships at that point, or?
Battalion had two, it was ashore. There might have been somebody on ship, very, very, very skeleton crew. But basically the battalion was ashore, and you have a battalion forward and a battalion rear. Battalion rear was actually located somewhere around Da Nang, and it just consisted of some administrative officers and administrative facilities and so forth, and then you had forward, which were the combat units, and we had to get forward. But we had to get to the rear first. We were officially put into the unit, signed the paperwork, all that stuff, and that was an interesting experience there. The S1, the personnel officer, well, we can send you here, there, what do you want to do? Okay, so we both kind of fumble over, and the guy with me, he ends up going to an FO, to a direct support battery as an FO, and I get sent to a direct support battery. Slightly different kind of units, we'll have different duties, but don't worry, we'll each get a chance at FO duty. And this is the one that really shocked me. He said, well, go get your 782 gear. 782 gear is the web belt and your canteen and your pack and your poncho. He says, it's over there. And now stateside, you go into a building and they issue you stuff as you go down the line. Here, there's a pile of bloody flak jackets, helmets with holes in it, ripped belts. I mean, this came off casualties. And you pick through the stuff to get the belt that had the least blood on it, helmets that didn't have holes in it, and that's where you got your 782 gear.
Okay, so welcome to Vietnam.
Huh?
Welcome to Vietnam.
Yeah, welcome to Vietnam. Oh shit, this is real.
All right. Now, which unit were you actually assigned to?
I was assigned to Whiskey Battery, BLT 3-1. That's important. See, the BLT was the overriding unit. It was designed as a strike force. It consisted of an infantry battalion, an artillery unit. It had tanks with it. It had engineers with it, a self-contained strike force. And this would be put on ships, float up and down the coast. When something really hit the fan, these people would be sent in country. When things calmed down, the BLT would revert back to the ships. And then every couple of months, another unit would take the BLT. The idea was a BLT was both a rest for the unit, and it was extra firepower if needed when things got hot and heavy. That BLT had formed just around time Tet, so it had gone in country and it had not been out of country since Tet. So you had a pretty ragged, tired, chewed up battalion fighting all along the DMZ and along the Quaviet River, which was kind of east-west along the DMZ.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Now, is part of that run by Dong Ha? Is that?
Yeah, Dong Ha is one terminus, and then we picked up Route 9, got in a convoy, and headed west just after Operation Pegasus, opened Route 9 all the way out to Quai San.
Right.
And then my unit, my artillery unit, actually was at Camp Carroll, which was en route to Quai San.
Okay. So how did you actually physically join your unit then?
Got in a truck, and they drove us out there.
Okay.
Sat in the truck, going, my God, this is the same route that the French got obliterated on back in the 50s, late 40s. Same one that just got opened up. You could see, here's a road, overhanging trees, just sitting there waiting. Just drop a grenade, we're dead. And that was, and just sat there and hoped nothing would happen. Oh, it's safe, yeah. And truck pulled off and stopped at Camp Carroll, and there I was. I joined my unit.
Okay. And what kind of reception did you get there?
Lieutenant said hello. Company commander said hello, and I said, you're the FDO, and let's show you how to make sure you know the fire direction center.
Okay.
And then, of course, got tight with other lieutenants in the unit. Our company commander, our battery commander, left very quickly after I got there. So the three lieutenants that were really there when I joined, one of them became the CO. He was experienced. He'd been in the country the longest. Another fellow was in country a little bit longer than me, and myself was the junior officer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then what was going on there at the time you joined them?
Not much, really. Seriously, the heavy fighting had been done. And again, I was in this kind of, a Whiskey Battery is a general support battery that some artillery units would have, not all artillery battalions would have. And it consisted of, at that time, when I joined it, literally a weapon, a 75 millimeter pack howitzer that was used effectively in World War II and in Korea. And I personally think they should have just left it alone. And they took the gun carriers there and they put a 4.2-inch mortar on it somehow. So you had the carriage that would support the 4.2-inch mortar when it fired. It would handle the recoil. And it was small enough that it could be helo-lifted. And that was a key because our helicopters not as big as the Army helicopters, so we couldn't helo-lift 105-millimeter howitzers out into the field where they were needed. You know, we put them at a fire support base, but if an operation was going on, we couldn't take artillery with them, but we could take these little jury-rigged things. They weren't jury-rigged. I mean, they're manufactured that way, but we could take these things called howe towers out into the field.
Okay. Now, were these 4.2-inch mortars on a howitzer carriage?
Yes.
Okay, so they are 4.2s. No, they're not 75s.
Nope.
Okay. And the 4.2 it's a larger caliber.
Yeah, 4.2 is about the same size as a 105.
Yeah. All right. And so how long did you stay in Camp Carroll at that point?
We were in Camp Carroll just a few weeks, and then we moved west to a place called Kalu, which was closer, just east of Quezon. Mm-hmm. And we're at Kalu, and basically there, again, artillery units moving around, so we were tasked with taking the ammunition that had been left at Kalu, salvaging what we could. I mean, there were bunkers flooded and full of mud and whatnot. We'd pull out all that ammunition, and occasionally we'd fire in support of the infantry. It really is strange. It's almost kind of you know, gee, is this for real? I remember attending, at Camp Carroll, we attended church services in an underground bunker because we'd be shot at by NVA artillery. Mm-hmm. At Kalu, we'd be attending church services outside, but you could hear, you know, about a kilometer down the road, all kinds of hex going on, firefights, machine gun firing and whatnot. Occasionally a bullet flying this way because, you know, most of the fighting was, you know, the bullets were aimed the other way, but occasionally something fly your way. And just, you know, this very weird reality we were in.
Okay. And were you doing much actual sort of fire direction work yourself? And were you now doing
Not at that
calculations?
time. I was doing fire direction work, but we weren't shooting much. A lot of the shooting we were doing were, quote, H&I, harassing and interdiction fires. Somebody put their finger on the map, oh, here's a trailed intersection, let's put some rounds there in case somebody's using that trail tonight. What time you want to hit it? Okay, we'll do it 11 o'clock, we'll put 6 rounds on. So at 11 o'clock, boom, whether there was anything there or not, God only knows. Mm-hmm. We went from Kalu, and we're being reassigned to go back toward our parent unit, which was south of Da Nang, 2nd Battalion, 11th Marines.
Okay, and that's an artillery battalion.
That's an artillery unit. We're going to go back to our parent unit. We stopped en route just north of Da Nang along the South China Sea, and we did some real serious firing for artillery, for infantry there. Ideally, you've got your firing table, and you've got another firing table over there, so when you adjust and you make your adjustments here, you say what they are, and these people are paralleling you. And so they're checking you before the data goes to the guns. Mm-hmm. Mini-TET, talked about that, was hitting. So we got a fire mission in. We first of all had a battery firing in support of infantry. Got another fire mission in, they're in deep trouble. So now we took this fire table. We're not going to have a check gauge now because that check gauge is going to fire for them. We're going to fire for them. Got another fire mission in. We were using one firing table to fire 2 different missions simultaneously. So we had 2 guns firing here, 2 guns firing here, 2 guns firing here. And 4 of these guns were firing off the same table, which just isn't done. But you had to do it if you got to get the artillery out for these guys. And that was an exciting couple of nights doing that.
Mm-hmm. And as you're doing this, are you getting communication directly from the observer in the field? And so you kind of know what their situation is?
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of how close you wound up firing to their positions or anything like that?
They wanted artillery out there probably 100 and 150 meters in front of them, which anything closer than 600 meters is considered danger close.
Yeah. And
we often fired about 300 meters in front of infantry. Our weapons weren't quite as accurate as the 05s. I know when I was a Fort Observer, I brought artillery in within 50 meters of friendlies. The things got hot and heavy, and you had to bring the artillery in real close, otherwise you're going to be really hurt.
Okay. Now, the mortars normally have a higher trajectory than a
Mm-hmm.
howitzer.
Yes.
Is that part of what makes it a little bit trickier in terms of targeting?
Yeah. You get into what's called range probable error and deflection probable error, and there's just more error. The weapon is firing so high, it's influenced by the air when it's up there, and so you could fire 3 rounds at the same exact data, and you'd have one here, one there, one there. They'd be reasonably close, but it wouldn't be as tight a group, it wouldn't be as close a group. And even with very accurate 155 or even 8-inch artillery, you had to know where the guns were. If I was the gun shooting at that target, this is the gun target line, okay? Those bullets will land very close to the gun target line, but they might land 100 meters over, 100 meters short, but they'll be close to this line. So if you had infantry, they could be very close to the artillery and be safe. But if there are artillery on the other side of that thing over there, because one round lands here, next round lands 50 meters away on the other side of the target, you don't know where it's going. So you have to know what you're doing with artillery. Right. It's not just,
Okay. All right. So now you're beginning, and so was this sort of the first more intense kind of activity you had?
It was boring as heck. We fired, because the artillery and four deuces are not that accurate, or four deuce is not that accurate, often infantry would not call for it, or they didn't want it, they were afraid of it. And often if the four deuce people don't know what they're doing, they were rightly so. So we would get fire missions to prep landing zones. The grunts are going to fly into the zone, put 500 rounds of HE on this target. And it was important to get those rounds out there to kill anything at the landing zone or immediately around it, but troops were not in contact at that time.
Okay.
And troops were in contact when I mentioned 3.
Right.
We're doing that. But when we got to our parent unit, ultimately back down to where we're going to be, down in Anwa, southwest of Dang, we basically fired H&Is at night. Okay, this crossroads, 6 rounds, and prep fires. It was boring, it was hot, and you just, kept cleaning the weapon,
Right.
building the sandbags, baked in the sun, wishing something had happened.
So how long did you stay in that situation?
I was in that for about 4 months. I purposely talked out loud at the mess chow, or mess tent. We had mess provided to us once a day, breakfast. Condensed eggs, rolled it over, and that was it. Okay. But I started, I want to go out as an FO, speaking a little louder than I should have and whatnot, because I was not in a battery that had FOs. Battalion commander heard me, which I knew he would. And he looked at me, he asked him, quote, if I'd been on the hill. I said, meaning an FO, I said no. And he said, well, if you go on the hill and you come off and you still want to go to the infantry, I'll sign off on it.
Okay. Before we move forward with that, let's talk a little bit about the 4-month span you spend there, where there wasn't much going on. So you said, what was the daily routine then?
Get up, make a quick survey of what's just going on in the battery, walk through the battery, shake people up, whatnot. I'd lay the battery and got guns ready to go. I mean, they were ready to go all the time, but relay them every morning. Would relay the guns. People would chow down. They'd clean their weapons. We'd inspect the weapons and so forth, make sure all the weapons were in good order, ammunition was stored properly, and so forth. Then we'd have people sandbag around their weapons. Every day more sandbags had to be filled around. Battalion would lay work parties on us, so we'd send 6 men down to the battalion where the battalion sergeant major had people doing things, various things. Lord only knows what. We'd police the area. We might get a fire mission, might get a second fire mission. I would lay the battery. I was acting as the executive officer at that time. I was no longer in the Fire Direction Center. Somebody else was in there. I was acting as the exec. And I'd lay the battery in the morning, I'd lay the battery in the afternoon, I'd lay the battery in the evening 3 times. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out a way to stabilize that mortar. See, if the mortar, this mortar's huge, it's this high and it's got a base plate this big, and when it fires, all the explosive power is pushed into the earth. And that means that base plate can slide and slip, and when it slides and slips, it's no longer pointed and aligned the right way. So you had to constantly lay them, relay them, check them to make sure they're okay. And if that wasn't done, you had a very inaccurate weapon. And we'll see if we still work.
Yep. All right.
So I was doing a lot of that, but I was also trying to figure out a way. And we got some big tires off God knows what trucks, and I filled them with rocks. And I actually put these base plates on top of these platforms and pounded them in, which gave you a stable platform and gave it a very stable platform. And so we had a stable platform that gave accurate fire, but we couldn't use it on anything. I mean, that thing reached out 4 miles, and their infantry within 4 miles of us, but they wouldn't call us for support. It was all going to the direct support. Right. The request for fire were going to the direct support battery.
How did that affect the morale among the enlisted men?
We had poor morale. I mean, we did the best we could. We're on good terms with our men. There wasn't, but it was going through the motions. It's when the hell are we going to have something to do? And a lot of these guys had served up north when there was a lot of action. They were firing, and they knew what they were doing was supporting somebody, and what they were doing was important in somebody's life. It was saving their life. And now they knew they were just basically kind of doing nothing. So it was hard. It was hard to keep people motivated.
Would some of them then drink or smoke pot or stuff like that, or would you have any issues with that?
No, we didn't have any issues. That was a strange thing. We didn't have issues like that at that time. That came later in the tour, and it might have occurred in that battery, that same battery after I left. We didn't have any race problems that I knew of, or if they were there, they were certainly buried. We didn't have insubordination. We had people doing their jobs.
Now, would you have, were there civilians in the area where you were?
There were some Vietnamese civilians who were brought into the area. They didn't work around us, but they worked in other areas of the battalion where they'd be used for construction projects. I was on the other end of the runway, and we didn't have anybody. We dug our own holes. And
were there villages in the area? Or?
They were outside the wire. We had no contact with them.
So your guys were not going out there and?
No.
Yeah.
Nope.
So not
they were there.
Right. Okay.
There was wire and mines between us and them.
Okay. So
which we didn't know about one day. We were told, let's clean out these weeds in the wire. So we jumped over the fence. We're out there, you know, pulling weeds. And remember, one of the sergeants looked down and said, bouncing Betty's in here that the French had put in. We didn't know about. And all of a sudden, everybody's...
Landmines?
Landmines.
Yeah. And
everybody's very cautiously going back. And as we're doing it, we're yelling, friendly's coming in, because it's dusk. And depending on who's paying attention, all they know are people are coming in who are armed. You know? So we got in safely and nobody was hurt, thank God. But we were pretty ticked off that nobody told us there were mines in there. We could have had a lot of people hurt.
Right.
No, it was very boring.
Okay. So it's just dull. And so now you have managed to lobby to get yourself an assignment. So
and then a lieutenant came in. Aha! That lieutenant's my replacement. I'm going out as an FO, and that son of a gun went to a direct support battery, and he went out as an FO. I was pissed. I really was. Figured that was my job. He stepped on a mine, so I went out and replaced him.
Okay.
And nothing could happen to me out there because my company commander was on his 3rd tour. The infantry company commander I was supporting. Captain Carroll had served as a advisor before the full commitment, served as the platoon commander, and now he's a company commander on his 3rd tour. As long as he was okay, nothing could happen to me. I knew that. And true.
Okay. So when you first go out to join them, then what's that experience like?
Well, it was different. Went out and got shot at the first day. It was not the boring routine. And I remember woke aboard Ed, you know, and it was just a different atmosphere. And we're all hunkered down, and the captain got, and I don't know where he got this big can of pears, and here, two platoon commanders, the UFO, the company commander, and maybe one of the engineers, we all got our plastic spoons and we're all eating communal style out of this can of pears. And who are you, who are you, where are you from, that kind of stuff. It was definitely different. And that was my first night, and then we started marching, and then, you know, the next night we did, you know, 13 clicks or something like that. And I had made the mistake of just getting a new pair of boots before this happened. They weren't broken in. I didn't know it was going to be going on as an FO. And that began to injure my feet. So now we made our 13 click hike. The second night I was there, got mortared for the first time. Had my first moral quandary. I was told we passed a village, just a little cluster of huts with women and kids in it, and we had to pass by them on the way back. And I was told to put artillery fire on that village in case there were enemy there, which they could have been, but I only saw women and kids there. And unfortunately, the decision, for some reason, higher up could not coordinate it in time for us to adjust artillery on them. And that was scary. Do I or don't I? In this case, I would have, but on 2 other occasions, I refused to fire in those situations. I would not adjust artillery on civilians. We were in another area where a platoon commander came rushing up to me. Had been in country 13 years, it seemed like. I mean, he was grungy. He was a grunt. He wasn't a platoon commander. He just wanted to mix it up and kill people. Hey, there's a VC out there, see him? And I look out there, and there are kids on water buffaloes. And they were in an area where anything out there, by definition, is VC. Mm-hmm. So he wanted me to adjust artillery fire on them, and I refused. I said, they're kids. And company commander, and I said, I don't shoot for you. And, you know, and he's swearing and screaming, put fire on him and whatnot. I report you. I said, I don't work for you. I work for the CO. Mm-hmm. Skipper came up, come on, Ed. We walked away. So the fire was not put down. And then later on, there's another real instance I'll tell you about later. Okay. Related to that.
All right. Now, how long did you have your first captain? How long did you stay with him?
Meade River. My experience with the infantry was, went on a couple patrols with him, you know, minor ops, sweeps, whatnot. Mm-hmm. And we went on one operation. We had to go up into the mountains. It was really miserable, really miserable. But those shoes had basically eaten away all the skin and down to the bone on both feet. I still have the scars, they still hurt. And I was medevaced out. The operation was over, we're just waiting for clear weather to medevac everybody out, or, you know, bring everybody out. Right. But we did get a medevac chopper in, so, you know, first aid man looked at me and said, we've got to get you out of here, otherwise we're going to have real problems. Mm-hmm. So what they did was they medevaced me out, and then they put me on a recon outpost. So for 2 weeks I sat on a hilltop adjusting fire with my feet and flip-flops on a mountaintop, sitting down there. Oh, there's 6 VC, and I adjusted artillery fire. And then I showed the recon folks up there what I was doing and tried teaching them. So I was a very effective artillery observer on this hill, drawing, putting fire on, and I was teaching these recon folks fire. So when I left the hill and went back, I had to go back to Recon Battalion to get back to my unit. The operations officer said, I got friends, operations officer, we got friends up in division. If you get a reassignment to the infantry and it gets up there, you'll come to us if you want it. We'd really like what you did. Great. Now I've got to get assigned to infantry. How am I going to do that? Went back into the field, and then we're sent on a huge operation. Oh, when I was on the hill, I laid the next step to get me out of the battalion. We were here, the guns were here, and a recon unit was out here. It could not communicate. It ought to come through us. And it took something like 25 minutes to get the first round on target, which is just crazy, stupid, shouldn't have happened. And it was just horrible. And these guys were in contact, heavy contact, and we're talking about a team of maybe 8 people, and you know, at the time it seems like all the VC and NV in the world are there. And it took 25 minutes to get the first rounds on target. It was just ludicrous. And when I got off the hill, I went back to recon, where the helicopter took me, went up the hill to where my regimental commander was, and wrote it out and turned it directly to the regimental commander, who immediately read it, and we talked about it. And he said, you probably should get back to your battalion and tell your battalion commander what you sent, which I did. And he was very stoic about it, but he was going to get his ass ripped. Oh, I mean, that's not good. And I wasn't trying to fry anybody, but that was just terrible. And then I went about my business, went back to my infantry company.
Right. And they were starting a big operation.
And we started a big Operation Meade River. And we got something like, we had a road, railroad tracks, a river, and a river. And it was maybe 4 clicks by 6 clicks. And we surrounded that whole area with something like 13 battalions. And the helicopters came in, and I asked the captain if I could be on the first flight going in, because if something hit the fan going in, I couldn't support them if I wasn't there. So I was on the ground with the captain and with the lead elements as we're the second, or one of the subsequent waves. I know the one that I was supposed to be on, helicopter got shot down, skidded along the earth, killed a lot of people. I got wounded. Company commander got burned first. He got hit, and then then the fuselage hit me. So as long as he was okay, I was, but as soon as he got taken out, I was out. And so I got banged pretty bad. Blunt trauma to the hip, screwed up my hip and my spine. He was burned very severely. I got a little burn here that got my arm infected and my back, and even after I came home, I was on antibiotics for 6 months just to clear up the infection from that little tiny burn. Anyhow, after this happened, I was medevaced. They x-rayed my leg. They say it's not broken. We'll put you back out in the field. So I went back out in the field, and nothing really happened until years later. It screwed everything up, and I've subsequently had spine surgery and total hip rejoicment and all this other stuff.
But you were back out again with the same unit you'd been with.
Yeah, and a new company commander who didn't have, finished the operation. I don't know how many thousand NVA, VC we were supposed to have killed. Got to see my first napalm victims. Something about as tall as this, only solid black, maybe a little thicker than this. So it's left a human being who's naped. During the first day of the operation, we almost got naped by our own fighters, our own fighter jets. You know, I mean, we were in the middle of a heavy firefight. We were using napalm, and one of the jets, you can see him, he doesn't look like the first 2 flights dropped the neck. He's coming at us. I was there. And everybody realizes it's coming at us, and our forward air controllers, you know, abort, 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 abort. And thank God he got that message and didn't drop the napalm, or we wouldn't be talking.
Right.